If you lay a hand on him, you'll have to answer to me." The entire graduation hall fell into silence after that one line. No one moved. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. A white security guard stood tense, hand hovering near his belt, eyeing the seated black father in the front row. Then, a man stepped into the aisle, tall, calm, his voice low and solid as steel. "I'll say it again. You don't touch him." Every word hit like a hammer. And it wasn't over yet. From 4 corners of the gym, 6 more men slowly rose. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The moment they stood, everything changed. You could feel it. A kind of silent power that comes only from men who've walked through fire together, who've bled for something bigger than themselves. Jeremiah Clark didn't flinch. The black veteran at the center of it all sat still, dignified, silent, because he knew he wasn't alone. This story isn't just about a racist moment in a crowded gym. It's about what happens when real strength stands up without saying a word. It's about loyalty, dignity, and the power of being seen without making a sound. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Jeremiah Clark didn't arrive with a parade. He didn't walk through the doors of Oak Hollow High looking for attention. He drove 9 hours in his old, dusty truck, a 2003 Ford, with one headlight dimmer than the other. The truck had been his late wife's favorite. And even now, 2 years after she passed, he still felt closest to her on the road. He stepped out in full-dress blues, not because he wanted people to notice, but because he didn't know any other way to honor his son's big day. His shoes were polished, his posture upright, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived 1,000 lives in one. Jeremiah had fought wars most people only knew through headlines. He had the medals, the scars, and the silence to prove it. But today wasn't about any of that. Today was about Malik, his youngest, his quiet one, the kid who never asked for much but somehow deserved everything. As he walked toward the entrance, ticket in hand, he paused, slipped a small photo from his pocket, his wife, holding baby Malik. He stared at it and whispered, "We made it, sweetheart, just like I promised." The school gym was buzzing. Parents in dress shirts, siblings waving signs, a little girl crying because her balloon floated away. It was everything a graduation should be. Jeremiah stepped inside and handed his printed ticket to a volunteer at the door. A young woman glanced at it, nodded politely, and pointed him toward the front. Family seating, 3rd row, left side. "Thank you," Jeremiah said softly, with the kind of calm that made people instinctively lower their voices in return. As he walked through the gym, some folks glanced up, some nodded, others looked once, then away quickly. He'd seen those looks before, the mix of curiosity and discomfort that followed a tall black man in uniform. But Jeremiah didn't break stride. He'd lived through too much to let a sideways glance slow him down. He found his seat. A plastic chair, slightly crooked. He adjusted it without a word and sat down, letting the sounds of the crowd wash over him. Malik would be walking that stage today. And no matter how loud or messy the world around him got, Jeremiah was going to witness it every second. He looked straight ahead, calm, steady, as if he'd been carved into that seat. The banners above the stage read, "Class of 2024" in bold silver letters. A few school officials shuffled papers near the podium. Students lined up near the far end of the gym, whispering, laughing nervously, adjusting caps. Somewhere in that crowd was Malik, tall, quiet, with eyes like his mother's. Jeremiah sat motionless, hands resting on his thighs, eyes scanning the students. He'd seen that walk in war zones, the slow, controlled steps before a mission. Today, it belonged to teenagers crossing into adulthood. The gym's lights buzzed faintly above him. A kid spilled his soda in the bleachers. Someone coughed 3 times in a row. All of it faded into background noise for Jeremiah. His world had narrowed to one purpose: to watch his son take that step. And then the music started. Pomp and circumstance. The audience stood. Jeremiah rose too, slow and solid. When the national anthem began, everyone placed hands over hearts. He didn't move. He didn't need to. Every inch of his presence was a salute. He thought of his wife. She would have cried through the whole thing. She would have fussed over Malik's collar, made him retie his shoes twice. He swallowed hard and kept his eyes forward. The last note of the anthem faded into the high ceiling. People clapped. The ceremony was beginning. Jeremiah slowly returned to his seat, his hands folding gently in his lap. He didn't smile, didn't shift. He was present, still, and focused. But behind him, something started to change. 2 security guards in matching black polos began moving down the left aisle. Neither looked much older than 30. One had a shaved head, thick neck, eyes hard. The other was lankier, chewing gum like he had somewhere better to be. They weren't cops, just private security, badges clipped to their belts. Jeremiah noticed them. He didn't flinch. He'd been trained to read a room, to sense tension before it arrived. And he knew they were coming for him. The shorter one leaned down just enough to be heard, his voice low but tight. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us." Jeremiah turned his head, calm as ever. "Is there a problem?" The taller one chimed in, almost casual. "This section is for family members." Jeremiah reached into his jacket, pulled out the same printed ticket he'd shown at the door. "It is. That's exactly what I am." The guard didn't even glance at the ticket. "We were told it's full," he said flatly. Jeremiah didn't move. "It was full when I sat down, too." He replied, "You want to tell me who gave that order?" The lanky one shifted on his feet, suddenly less confident. "Look, man, it's not a big deal. There's extra seats in the back. Let's not make this into something it doesn't have to be." Jeremiah's voice stayed even. "I drove 9 hours to watch my son graduate. I'm not moving." A few heads turned, not many, but enough. A woman a few rows over leaned in to whisper something to her husband. A teenager in the bleachers tilted his phone, quietly recording. The shorter guard straightened, his tone firmer. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time." Jeremiah leaned back slightly. His voice dropped, quieter now. "You can ask all day." The taller guard's expression tightened. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back." There it was. Jeremiah knew that line. He'd heard versions of it in boardrooms, hospital waiting areas, and even base cafeterias. He stared straight ahead, still unshaken, and without saying another word, the air around him began to shift. The tension in the gym thickened, and the kind of tension that doesn't come from noise but from silence, from the way people hold their breath when something feels wrong. The shorter guard tapped his radio, whispered into it. Jeremiah didn't blink. He stayed seated, unmoving. His fingers rested loosely on his knees, like a man who had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. A woman sitting beside him leaned slightly closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't let them move you." He nodded once, a silent thank you, but he kept his eyes on the stage. The taller guard tried again, his voice softer, more urgent now. "If you've got a problem, Take it up with the school office. We're just following instructions." Jeremiah turned his head slowly. "What's your name, son?" The guard blinked. "Officer Malley." Jeremiah's reply came steady. "Not officer. You're private security." That stung. The other guard stepped forward. "Hand near his radio, that's enough. If you don't stand up." He didn't finish. Because that's when the side doors opened and someone walked in. Not a school official, not a teacher. A man with broad shoulders, calm eyes, and a presence that made the room sit up straighter without a single word. The man who entered didn't come alone. One by one. Others followed not in a line, not in a group, but with the same energy. Calm, focused, silent. 6 men in total scattered themselves around the gym, no uniforms, no fanfare. Just the unmistakable posture of those who had seen real battle. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Their presence alone pulled the attention of the crowd. Slowly, the audience began to sense that something bigger than a seating dispute was unfolding. Jeremiah didn't turn to look. He didn't have to. He knew them, every single one. Brothers in arms from Fallujah and Mosul, from the places you don't talk about unless you've been there. Men who had once followed his orders through smoke and fire, who had bled beside him under open sky. The guards, though, didn't recognize what they were standing in the middle of. Not yet. The tall one leaned in again. "I'm trying to help you, man. Don't make this a scene." Jeremiah's eyes flicked toward him not with anger, but with a quiet finality. "You don't have that kind of favor to offer." That's when the first of the 6 men stepped into the aisle. No words, just presence. He stood still, feet shoulder-width apart, arms folded, eyes locked on the guards. A clean-shaven man with a jaw like granite and a stare that didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. A second man rose from the far side of the bleachers, then a third, near the entrance, each one moving with quiet precision. Different angles, same intent. The guards started to notice now. The shorter one adjusted his radio, looked around, then back at Jeremiah. His confidence faded, but not his ego. "Listen, man," he said again, quieter now. "You're making this into a situation." Jeremiah turned, slow and deliberate. "And you're not listening." The guard's hand twitched toward his belt, not a weapon, but close enough to draw attention. That's when another voice cut through the air. Calm. Steady. Sharp. "Is there a reason this man's being harassed?" It came from the center aisle. A tall man with a salt and pepper beard, wearing a black coat and gray shirt. His voice didn't rise, it dropped, and everyone in the room heard it. The taller guard blinked. "Who are you?" The man stepped closer. "The one who's telling you this ends now," and the gym went still. Another man stood from the back corner, then another, all 6 now fully visible, not lined up, not marching, just present, the kind of presence that shifts gravity in a room. The audience felt it. A hush spread across the gym. Even students began turning. Forgetting their place in line, teachers tried to redirect focus to the stage, but the tension had taken hold, something deeper than embarrassment, something close to shame. The shorter guard, Garvin, according to his badge, clenched his jaw. He wasn't ready to back down. He glanced at Malley, who now looked unsure, eyes darting toward the principal, whispering with urgency at the front. Garvin stepped closer. Too close. "Sir," he said, louder this time. "This is your last warning." Jeremiah didn't move. To do what exactly? Garvin leaned in, his belt brushing Jeremiah's knee. To stop making a scene, we don't want trouble. Just move to the back. Jeremiah met his gaze. Unwavering. You're the only one causing trouble. And then Garvin said the thing he should never have said. You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everybody else. This is a high school, not your base. The gym stopped breathing. Even the air felt heavier. That sentence dropped like a stone into water. The ripples were instant, sharp intakes of breath. A baby stopped crying. Even the hum of the lights felt louder. Jeremiah didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He took a slow breath not to steady himself, but to stay rooted. He had been through worse. Far worse. But something in that moment shifted. Garvin stepped back half an inch, as if realizing he'd said too much. Mally looked like he wanted to disappear. And across the gym, the 6 men were no longer just standing, they were watching. Their bodies tensed, subtly, like wolves sensing a threat, like soldiers waiting for the signal. Creed, the man with the salt and pepper beard, moved first, one calm step forward, his voice still low, still measured. "If you touch him," he said, "you'll answer to me." Garvin scoffed. "And who the hell are you?" Creed didn't blink. "The man who's telling you this ends right now." And then he stopped, planted in the aisle. Not posturing, not threatening, just present. Like a wall you didn't see until it was too late. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just watched because they all understood what was at stake. The principal had moved from her seat by now. She whispered into a walkie clipped at her side, her eyes darting between the guards and the crowd. An assistant principal walked quickly toward the back of the gym, trying to avoid drawing more attention, but it was too late. The moment was no longer private, it was public, it was alive. The SEALs didn't speak, they didn't need to. Their stance alone communicated something deeper than words respect, history, readiness. Garvin stood frozen. His hand dropped away from his belt, but his pride held on like a bad habit. "Sir," he tried again. This time without the force, "we're just doing our job." Jeremiah tilted his head slightly. That job come with common sense, with dignity. The gym was absolutely still. Someone near the bleachers dropped their program. It fluttered to the floor louder than it should have. Then Creed stepped forward again, just one step, but enough to say he wasn't bluffing. "You're embarrassing yourselves," he said. "And you're one breath away from crossing a line you can't uncross." Garvin opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked around the room, and for the first time, realized he was completely outmatched. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were locked in, eyes wide, phones out. But no one was cheering. This wasn't entertainment. This was something real. Jeremiah remained seated, unmoved. He didn't need to stand. The weight of who he was already standing for him. Creed turned slightly, scanning the room like it was second nature. He wasn't worried. He was measuring, calculating, preparing just in case. Finally, Garvin took a small step back, not much, but enough. His hand dropped fully from his belt. His chest rose, then fell like all the fight had drained from him, leaving only the echo of ego behind. That's when the principal finally reached them. She didn't shout, she didn't scold. She leaned in close to Garvin and Mally and whispered. Whatever she said, it landed. Both guards turned without a word. Shoulders tight, heads down. They walked toward the rear exit, eyes fixed straight ahead. No apology, no explanation, just retreat. Jeremiah didn't watch them leave. He simply exhaled. slow, controlled, like a man letting go of something heavy. And across the gym, Malik saw it all. His father hadn't said much, but his silence had moved an entire room. That was power, silent power. Malik stood near the center of the student line, cap slightly crooked, fingers gripping his name card a little too tightly. He had seen it all from the moment the guards walked toward his father, to the second they turned and walked away. And through it all, Jeremiah never moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead. He didn't ask for justice. But justice came anyway. Malik's heart was pounding. Not from fear, from something deeper, something heavy and hot, sitting just beneath his ribs. Pride, respect, fire. He'd grown up knowing his father had served in war, but the details were always vague. Just bits and pieces of framed metal in the hallway, an old photo in a cracked leather wallet. His dad didn't talk about it much, but now, Malik didn't need the stories. He'd just lived one. From across the gym, he saw the men, the 6 of them, still standing, like statues, like shadows of his father's past, come to life. Guardians who didn't ask permission to protect what mattered. Malik blinked hard, fighting back the sting behind his eyes. He wasn't just walking across a stage today. He was stepping into something far bigger, something sacred. The line moved forward slowly. Names were called. Applause rose and fell like soft waves. But Malik wasn't hearing any of it. His focus stayed locked on that third row, on the man who had just taught him more in 10 silent minutes than any speech ever could. A student beside him leaned over and whispered, "That your dad." Malik didn't answer. He didn't have to. Everyone in the gym already knew. He took a deep breath and rolled his shoulders back. He had practiced this walk in the mirror, in his bedroom, even in the hallway at home. But nothing had prepared him for this feeling, like he was being carried by something invisible and powerful. 3 more students ahead of him, then 2. He caught a glimpse of Creed, standing near the aisle, arms folded. The others were scattered, still watching, still holding the line. They didn't need thank yous. They didn't need cameras. They were there because they understood something the guards never would. Real strength doesn't posture. It protects. Malik closed his eyes for half a second, centered himself. Then the assistant principal whispered, "You're next." He nodded, stepped forward, and felt every footstep land with purpose, with legacy, with weight. The announcer cleared her throat. There was a pause, just long enough for the room to settle. Malik Clark. That was it, 2 simple words, but they hit like a drum. The gym erupted, but not with wild noise. It was deeper than that. The applause had rhythm, weight, intent, the kind of clapping that said, "We saw what happened. We understand who you are." All 6 men, the SEALs, stood taller, hands raised. They clapped in perfect sync. Not as friends, not as heroes, as witnesses, as protectors of something sacred. Malik walked across the stage slowly, each step steady, measured. His head held high, eyes scanning the crowd for one face. And there he was, Jeremiah, still seated, still calm, but in his eyes, pride burned like a sunrise. Malik took the diploma, shook the principal's hand, turned toward the audience and found his father's gaze. They didn't wave. They didn't need to. Just a small nod, a quiet smile. The kind that only comes from 2 men who have survived something, who understand the weight of silence. Malik stepped off the stage, taller than before. And the applause, it didn't fade, it grew. Because everyone knew. They had just witnessed something that mattered. The final names were called. The last diploma handed out. Students threw their caps into the air with a burst of joy and laughter. Phones flashed, families hugged, but Jeremiah Clark stayed seated. He watched it all unfold from that same plastic chair, arms resting calmly in his lap. The moment had passed, but the meaning lingered heavy and undeniable. Creed walked over slowly as the crowd began to thin. He didn't speak right away, just stood beside Jeremiah, watching the students file out, watching Malik disappear down the hallway with the others. "You good?" Creed finally asked, his voice low. Jeremiah nodded. "Yeah, been through worse." Creed smiled a little, not with humor, with recognition. "Still shouldn't have happened?" "No," Jeremiah said, "it shouldn't have." Another one of the SEALs, Meeks, approached from the far side. "We tried to stay low-key," he said, eyes serious, "but once that guy touched his belt..." Jeremiah raised a hand gently. "You all did what needed to be done." They stood there a moment longer. 3 men. No more words exchanged. Just the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Then Jeremiah took one final look at the stage and said, "I need to see my boy." Outside, the sun was high, casting sharp shadows across the parking lot. Families were gathered in small clusters snapping photos, passing around bouquets, calling out names. Malik stood near the flagpole, gown unzipped, diploma in one hand, phone in the other. He spotted his father before anyone else did. The moment their eyes met, the noise around them dimmed. The crowd didn't matter. The celebration didn't matter. What mattered was that Jeremiah was still standing and had never once needed to rise to be seen. Malik walked toward him fast, but with purpose. They met halfway. "You okay?" Malik asked, his voice tight. Jeremiah nodded. "You?" "Yeah," Malik said. He looked away for a second, jaw tense. "They tried to move you." "I know." Malik's hands curled into fists. "I was ready to walk off that stage. I swear I was 2 seconds from calling them out." Jeremiah placed a hand on his son's shoulder, firm but calm. "And that's exactly why you didn't," he said. Malik blinked. "What do you mean?" "Because you knew I could handle it. And because you handled your moment like a man, you didn't let them take it from you." Malik stood a little straighter and nodded. Malik glanced toward the school doors. The 6 SEALs had come outside now, scattered near the edge of the lot. They weren't talking much, just standing, watching, like guardians in civilian clothes. "Who were those guys?" Malik asked quietly. Jeremiah followed his gaze. He didn't smile, but his voice softened. "Men I bled with, men who know what loyalty means, men who don't forget." Malik nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. That was powerful. It was necessary, Jeremiah said. They stood together in silence, a father and a son, side by side in the late afternoon sun. Around them, balloons bobbed in the air, cameras clicked, and laughter echoed off the pavement. But in their space, everything was still. Jeremiah spoke again, this time looking his son in the eyes. Sometimes silence is louder than shouting, and sometimes standing up without speaking says more than 1,000 words. Malik took a breath, held it, then let it go. "You gonna tell me the real stories now?" he asked. Jeremiah chuckled, just once. "Some of them. You're old enough for the real parts now." They turned together, shoulder to shoulder, and began walking toward the truck. Not just father and son anymore, but 2 men. They reached the truck, the same old Ford that had carried Jeremiah across deserts and highways, through memories and miles. Malik paused at the passenger door, running his hand along a long scratch near the handle. "She would have made you retake every photo today," he said, half smiling. Jeremiah nodded, "and fixed your tie at least 3 times. They climbed in. The truck was warm from the sun, but inside it felt like a shell, a safe space away from noise, from questions, from everything else. For a while, neither spoke. The engine didn't start, the doors stayed shut. Just the silence between them, not awkward, not empty, just full. Then Malik turned. "I gotta ask," he said, "why didn't you say anything? You just sat there." Jeremiah tapped the steering wheel once, then looked straight at his son. "Because I don't have to stand up to prove who I am," he said, "and I don't need to raise my voice to be heard." Malik let those words sink in. Outside, families were laughing, packing up chairs, tossing graduation caps into trunks. But inside that truck, something bigger than a diploma was being passed down. A lesson only lived men could teach. Malik stared out the window, quiet, then spoke, slower this time. "You know how many times I've had to choose between letting stuff slide or blowing up?" Jeremiah nodded once. "Yeah, more than you should have had to." Malik looked at him. "What those guys did today, it wasn't right." "No," Jeremiah agreed. "It wasn't. But how we respond, that's what defines us." "But they disrespected you, in front of everybody." Jeremiah took a slow breath, and everybody saw it, but they also saw the truth. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded photo, his late wife holding baby Malik. Edges worn from years of holding on. "I carried this through war," Jeremiah said, "carried it through losing your mom. Carried it here today, not because it gives me strength, but because it reminds me what's worth protecting." Malik looked at the photo, then at his father. "You always knew who had your back." Jeremiah gave a quiet smile. "I didn't need to know, I just had faith. Real men don't vanish when things get uncomfortable. They show up, and they stand." Malik nodded. Slowly, something settled in his chest. That truth was going to stay with him forever. Malik leaned back in the seat, his fingers still brushing the edge of that old photograph. "I want to be like that," he said quietly, "like you." Jeremiah didn't hesitate. "You already are," he replied. "You walk that stage with pride. You didn't let anger steal your moment. You stayed grounded even when everything around you tried to knock you off balance." Outside, the last few students were hugging goodbye. Cars pulled out of the lot, horns honking in celebration. But inside the truck, time felt slower, heavier. From across the way, Creed stood by his own vehicle. He glanced over, just once, and raised a hand, not a wave, just a gesture of respect, simple, solid, understood. Malik returned it without needing to think. It wasn't just for Creed. It was for what all of them had done that day, what they represented. Jeremiah turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. "So, what now?" Malik asked. Jeremiah looked over, his voice lighter now. "Now we drive home. You get to pick dinner." Malik grinned. "Waffle House." Jeremiah chuckled. "Of course." As they pulled out of the lot, the school faded behind them. But what happened inside would never leave them. Not ever. The sun dipped lower as they drove, casting long shadows across the highway. The kind of light that made everything feel softer, more honest. Malik sat quietly, watching the trees blur past the window, His cap rested in his lap. The diploma folder lay flat against his knees. He finally turned toward his father. Today changed me. Jeremiah didn't answer right away. He let the words settle between them. Let Malik hear his own voice. Let the weight of it sink in. Malik spoke again. I used to think strength meant saying something, doing something, making noise. He paused, then added, but you didn't move. You didn't say a word. And somehow that was louder than anything else in the room. Jeremiah's hand stayed steady on the wheel. That's because real strength doesn't shout, he said. It doesn't need to. When you know who you are, really know, the world either hears you or reveals itself trying not to. Malik nodded slowly. That truth was clear now. Not just because he'd heard it, but because he'd seen it. Lived it. And once you've witnessed silent power, it changes the way you carry yourself forever. The road stretched ahead, smooth and open. Malik leaned his head back against the seat, eyes closed for just a moment. Not asleep, just thinking. I kept replaying it in my head. He said, that moment when the guards came, I was ready to lose it. I thought maybe I had to. Jeremiah's voice was calm. You will face moments like that again. People will test you, push you, try to make you react. He paused, then added, but your reaction, that's your power, not theirs. Malik opened his eyes. So you sat still, not because you couldn't fight, but because you didn't have to. That's right, Jeremiah said. You don't bring a storm unless the storm is needed, and most of the time it's not. The truck rolled past fields of tall grass, telephone poles lining the way like silent sentries. The world felt quiet, earned. Malik looked over again. You ever regret not saying something? Jeremiah thought for a second, then shook his head. No, because the men who stood up spoke for me. And more importantly, they reminded everyone in that room what respect looks like. That silence, that stillness had echoed louder than any argument ever could. The truck turned off the main road, pulling into a quiet diner parking lot, a familiar spot with flickering lights and scratched-up booths. Waffle House. Malik grinned. You weren't kidding. Jeremiah smiled back. I said you get to choose. They parked in the corner, away from the crowd. As the engine shut off, Malik looked at his father one last time that evening, really looked at him. Thanks, Dad, for everything. Jeremiah reached into his pocket. He pulled out the photo again, his wife cradling baby Malik, both of them frozen in time. He handed it to Malik. It's yours now. Malik took it gently, as if it might break. He stared at the faces in that photo, his mother's eyes, his father's hands, his own beginning. What am I supposed to do with it? Jeremiah looked him in the eye. Carry it through whatever comes. Let it remind you who you are, and who's always with you even when no one's watching. They stepped out of the truck together. No rush, no noise. Just two men walking side by side. Some people shout to be remembered. Others just show up and never have to speak a word to be heard. That is silent power. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.